We exhausted him. We put him in rooms like this for literally probably 2 days straight. And he kept saying new and interesting things at every turn to the students. And it was actually one of the students in the joint degree program who said, if you could do one thing right in your time at Yale, it would be to form a deeper relationship with that human. And that was Vincent Stanley. And what it signified for us was something that was really powerful, is there are long haul heroes out there in the world who've spent significant time and energy trying to solve the most intractable problems in business and society and communities. And then there are a few who grace you with the ability to kind of share that knowledge, document it, put it out, and put it into a form that other people can use it. And we're in a world that's overwhelmed by information, but potentially short on insight. And the combination of people who've done the work and then are willing to take the time to document it and put it in place is what we really need to focus on. We should be filters for that and amplifiers. And so this talk with Bren, you get to, many of you in the audience have received a copy of the book, but this is exactly what we want to feature here. Someone who's done the work over a really long and consistent period of time and then has the grace and the kind of gift of being able to communicate it and capture it for a broader audience. And so putting two lovely people like this together is when kind of the best moments happen around this place. So we deeply appreciate both of you making the time for this, for writing what you've done, and for doing all the work and sharing it out to hopefully inspire crews of other people to sort of get on that same journey. So thank you.
You. Thank you all for coming. I want to start out by saying that I love this book, so I'm not going to be a hostile interviewer. And I'd also recommend it to you. If you liked Let My People Go Surfing, you'll love Eat Like a Fish. And but I want to start off. The book has been out since 2019. It is still a solid representation of your experience and of what needs to be done in the food system. But I'm wondering, for those who are less familiar with your work, if you could talk a little bit about your own personal evolution from Newfoundland to the Grand Banks to Bering Sea to Hurricane Irene and to the Thimble Islands.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm so honored to be. We've never done this before.
Yeah.
And really, really honored. And you won't like this, but you've been a mentor of mine, like both from afar. Just incredible. And thanks so much for everybody for coming. It's always daunting to be at Yale. So let's see if we can hold my own. And just interrupt me because I'm, a bar storyteller. Like, just stop,
I'll shoot a beer from.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, the book was written a while ago, and what's interesting, is, so we'll talk about that, but I've also lived through this bubble, a speculative bubble, and then maybe out the other side. And so that's and that all happened after the book. So I was born and raised in Newfoundland, Canada. My parents were draft dodgers out of New York and Stanford, and I think they call themselves war resistors. I think that's the polite term. So I was born in this little place called Maddox Cove, and it's the edge of the most eastern point of all of North America. And it's like a Brooklyn foodie's dream, like when they think of what they want to eat. Fisherman's Co-op next door, little painted houses, red, greens, and blues, painted with leftover boat paint, selling cod tongues door to door, fish, freshness measured in hours, not days. It was just exactly one, and that's all gone. That's the sad end of the story. But I loved it, and all I wanted to be was a fisherman. And as I've gone through my life and looked back, because I've tried other stuff that all didn't do well, but I just wanted that self-directed life. Waking up in the morning, going out in the horizon, my own boss, succeeding and failing on my own terms. We often talk about agency. I had no word for that, but that's kind of what it was, right? And then that pride of helping feed my community and that soul-filling jobs. I remember a lot of those folks, I won't get political hero, but have supported Trump, had those soul-filling jobs.
Mhm.
We are the farmers, the coal miners, the steel workers, the oil workers, all those folks. I grew up around those folks, and and it's not a job, it's a culture. It's jobs you write, you sing and write songs about. That's the core of it. And we need just hold on to that, because that's what we need in the future. At least that's what my people, right? It's that soul-filling. So dropped out of high school. We moved to the US and just hated it. So I dropped out of high school and headed out to sea, fished the East Coast, Gloucester, Lynn, tuna, cod, mackerel, you name it. I fished it. I ended up in the Bering Sea, fishing cod and crab. And so I went from the artisanal, this was the late 80s when I ended up in Alaska, to the height of industrial fishing. We're actually, a lot of World War II technology had transferred into the fishing industry, radar, sonar, bigger boats. There'd been sort of a repurposing of a lot of World War II technology. So I became a pillager. And as I thought more and more about it, I used to use the framing of like ecological redemption, right? But as I've gotten older, I don't think there's a moral guilt to it. I think that's an environmental thing,
Mhm.
right? Being a coal miner is not an immoral act. Keeping the lights on, feeding the country, is not an immoral act. The captains of industry, that's a whole different calculus. But like my guilt faded, right? As I realized that we just got too good at what we did, which is a great human quality. Let's get too good at other stuff, right? And but it was, everything about overfishing, tearing up entire ecosystems with our trawls, chasing fewer and fewer fish further and further out to sea, just deeply, deeply extractive. Most of our food going to McDonald's. I was at sea for months at a year. We were processing, freezing, the whole thing. But then the cod stocks crashed back, and am I going on too long?
No.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm getting a bit older too, so I have to be careful. So the cod stocks crashed back home in Newfoundland, and 30,000 people thrown out of work. Canneries empty, boats beached, and just fishermen walking like hungry ghosts. And I went back, and it is amazing to see an economy built up over 150, 200 years, decimated overnight. And it is brutal, brutal to see. And most of those fishermen now, their kids are all in the oil sands in Alberta. They've been transferred. That's where the good work is, and they've been transferred there. And that's where I learned, like, one, this is not for me, my people, not about birds and bees and seals. This is a kitchen table issue. There are no jobs on a dead ocean. It's an economic perspective. And just as an aside, oddly enough, 4 weeks ago, Greenpeace asked me onto the board, which I declined because they stopped the seal fishery in Newfoundland in the 80s and had a really harmful effect in Newfoundland there. But God, what a journey, right? From there to there. So I went on this search for something, some different relationship with the sea, maybe sustainability, didn't really have words for it. I went out to the aquaculture farms. That was supposed to be the great answer, right? It's growing salmon at the time. We're going to feed the planet, create these new blue jobs. And instead, it was exactly what we don't want to do. And I learned from the negative of the no, what a solution should not be, because we were, pesticides, antibiotics, all this sort of stuff. We were growing neither fish nor food. But if I look back to what the mistake was that aquaculture came on the scene and it said, okay, let's grow around what people want to eat. Let's grow around markets, not the ocean. People want to eat salmon, tuna, cod, let's grow that stuff. But that's a wild palate. And what it missed was like looking at the ocean as a unique agricultural space. What are its unique attributes? And like we have a clean slate and we can say like, what are the crops, the animals that will do? And they picked, like that, it sounds kind of like crystal and, sort of not like hippie-ish almost, but like ask the ocean what to grow is a very, very core question, I think, across the board. So anyway, so left that and then ended up appropriately and with full consent chased a woman to Long Island Sound and remade myself as an oysterman. And I was a terrible oysterman. I was like, the adrenaline and the criminal record of a of a fisherman. I'm good at hunting and killing things. This was boring, slow, like tea, drinking tea. And like, it was just like, I really didn't like it. And I was terrible at it. I killed millions of oysters. It was like a death camp out there. But over time, I got better. And I've been on that same patch of water for 19 years now. And I developed this blue thumb, this fascination with like cultivation and, the changing terroirs over time, over seasons, like just this, I got completely rewired. And
Just,
yeah.
For a moment, can you define memoir?
Oh, yeah, sure. Remember, like terroir with wine. And so where you get different flavors, different soils, different regions. Same with every bay, harbor, an oyster tastes. It's not a scam. It's very real if you all have done it. And it just has to do with like, what's the salinity? What's that sweetwater mix of fresh water and salt water, the depth people are growing at. And it's a pretty special thing. And we're finding this with more and more of our seafood, that there is the memoir. So, so I built a business, and this was like the boutique food, whatever you want to call it, the Whole Foods, Brooklyn food moment. And like Yale kids were coming on, kids, full adults were coming on the farm, right, wearing their kale shirts and all this sort of stuff. And I ran a CSA for fisheries, CSF, at the Yale farm and down on the docks. And it was this great moment, and I thought that was the future. And I was happy, right? I had a job, I had my own boat, self-directed life. I was feeding people, like had those, I thought I was on it. But two things happened. One was I got hit by Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Sandy twice. And now this is like, everyone knows climate change is here. But then it was like a grandchild's problem, 100-year slow lobster boil. But in the ocean, we were seeing it right away. Like the lobsters were all gone and the storms were coming in, temperatures were changing. And so I was like, for the second time in my life, part of an ecological collapse, the sort of canary in the coal mine. And that was a moment where, do I leave? 2 years in a row, like it's really hard to rebuild. Do I leave the water, or do I stay? And I decided to stay. But the a couple things I learned out of there. One was oysters taught me what to grow, because there are these things that you don't have to feed, you don't have to water, you don't have to fertilize, you don't have to do anything. There's too many nutrients in the ocean and they grow with that. And what does that mean? It's great environmentally and regeneratively and stuff, but it's great from a business perspective because it's low overhead. There's zero inputs. So and they don't swim away, which is significant because you don't have to cage them. Which, yeah, poor fish, but the real thing is it's expensive to cage them, right? So so this idea of the ocean is unique agricultural space where you can grow things with zero inputs that don't swim away, you don't have to feed, and you can use that entire water column. So you can get very efficient growth and you don't have to fight gravity. Everything's slow. So that's what oysters taught me. What I realized out of that though also was there was a real cap on the boutique foods, the Whole Foods economy. It was like at its boom, alternative proteins, all this sort of stuff. And over time, that's really maxed out. So then I'll wrap up. So the farm was, I rebuilt the farm and started growing, the principles were to grow multiple species. So there was a crop for all seasons. This is all stuff that you all would really recognize as long as there's zero input, crops. I leaned heavily into seaweeds, not because I liked it or wanted to grow it, but it's easier to grow plants than animals. And I learned to be knowing that the world was going to be very volatile. That was the mindset for all. Resilience was about understanding volatility. So for example, on farm design, you had to be a willow, not an oak. Right, so I used to try to stand up and like have big buoys, and the farm would just get picked up by the ice of the storms and move half-mile away. Instead, now the storms come in, I bend and come back up. So everything's weighted to give, right? The humility before the ocean, we're not going to win, is key. And then really respecting the commons, because we need the right to grow there commercially. So stakeholder engagement and also low aesthetic impact, all these different things. Like, and it became really a design project. Then, and this is where the book sort of close to ends, is we started Green Wave, little farmer training program. And then, slightly corrupt my wife on the board and like training friends, like that kind of thing. But then 8,000 people signed up for the farmer training program. And that was crazy. And then we had to figure out what to do. And that's sort of where the book ends, in that like we built programming, like we thought it was a big deal. We built a hub with, that there's, 7,000 people on, with farmer, over 100 videos, farm design tools, budgeting tools, a community with 6,000 people on it, like a dating service for future contracts between farmers and buyers, like this whole set of stuff. And then we were doing, webinars and farmer gatherings, that sort of standard group of stuff. And we thought that was enough, but it wasn't.
And why did it turn out not to be enough?
So, we entered what I thought was a bubble, but turned out someone taught me it was what Gartner hype curve, right? Which huge amount of interest came in, just flooded in. About $1 billion came into the industry, largely on the market side. And the Gartner hype curve is like, just for you don't know, if like you have an idea, as opposed to a bubble, like there is an idea that is going to be part of humanity's future. Our food systems being pushed out to sea, fresh water, the nutrient crisis on land, a rising population. We will be eating out of the ocean. We will be eating especially plants out of the ocean. Like we don't know how long, when it's going to happen, but that's going to happen. So everybody got really excited about that. And the kelp, especially, what I thought was the benefit was its problem was that it could be used for too many things. It's like the soldier fly. The black soldier fly, that biofuel, blue carbon, bioplastics, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, soy alternatives, like on and on and on.
Like soy.
Yeah, which was like really exciting. And that's what captured a lot. Like, here is a domestic resource, renewable resource to biomine, right? With all these people on land with the skills to do it, right? So like, so it made sense, but rushed in. And so, so we had, and then I just sort of stood back and like we did our thing, but it was just way above my pay grade, right? And so people started to create like blue carbon sort of cowboy schemes where they were going to float millions of pucks of seaweed out that were robotic, that were going to drop seaweed to the sea floor and capture carbon. A lot of folks from Yale actually ended up at this company. Total scam. Anybody that went against the basic biology and ecology of kelp, right? For anybody that's a farmer. But cut a ton of money from Stripe and all, Stripe, I think it's Stripe, and all these folks. Then the Google boys went and they did breakoffs to do huge floating robotic farms. The lack of humility is stunning as a design principle. Like the ocean is not like the land. It's just like fundamentally different.
The land is not like the land.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So we had, some of these companies did like, other companies essentially became real estate. Companies were trying to get thousands and thousands of acres all over the world, New Zealand, Alaska, everywhere, right? So they came in and it was real, but what was even more interesting, that'd be expected. And like the hedge funds came in with their sort of in this relationship between the speculators and the fake it till you make it pitch decks, like the lack of rigor that you see amazingly in that space. And the like no long-term view, that sort of the unicorn view, even though they're imaginary animals that cannot work in ag, right? But they just like brought in all this. Really, at the end of the day, it's ideology, I'd say, in many ways. As I talk to them, like I spent a lot of time with these folks, right? A lot of them funded Green Wave while they were investing, all this sort of stuff. So I have a straws view, and it's from below, and there's a lot I do not understand, but like there's just lived experience through this journey. But then the other thing was like the scientists. And they came to my wedding. I was like so close to them, like all the seaweed scientists. And, they were under pressure and this isn't to blame anybody, but they were under pressure from the sort of investment funds that were being set up or had been set up at the universities to monetize their research. Then, and the scientists get excited and they're like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. Right? It's another way, and so then they start setting up companies or joining the really speculative companies because that's like where the big opportunity is. And so what they started doing was they were part of the speculative push and asking the wrong questions to build an industry. So like the best science, the ones who didn't do that were asking 20-year, 30-year questions about climate resilience, about like massive scale on nutrient levels in the center of the ocean. If you had massive, sort of these questions, when there are all these near-term questions that you need to answer, you need really good science on in order to build the foundations of an industry. Yeah. So like they all joined the spectrum. Then government was interesting because RPE came in, the Department of Energy. And they came on my boat, that's the whole program. And like, so many of these were my mistakes. Like I didn't know, right? You know what I mean? I was just like, it was a crazy time. They created a program, and what did they do? They put tens and tens of millions of dollars into biofuel, which is the worst use of kelp. The lowest cost. You need the most volume, and their goal of the program, this is when I started to split with them, was to drive down the price as low as possible per foot, per acre, and talk about leaving farmers out. Right, out of the get-go, right? So you see all these like social justice programs and stuff at Department of Ag and stuff like that, and then you see this thing, which is like the fundamental goal there was just wrong. And we knew biofuel there's a whole history of biofuel and kelp in the U.S. Department of Energy and trying to start farms in the 70s. We won't go into that. But then the other thing, the experience of government is they treated those of us that were in the water like criminals. There's a long history of the government treating fishermen like criminals. Right? And I got a criminal record, but I'm not a criminal, right? There's a difference. And it was crazy in that, like, not only did they not understand the ocean and not spend much time on the water, but the regulatory environment, I had to break the law to innovate. Had to, right? So my view was like, live in the spirit of the law, not in the law, right? And you just had to. And we were talking about Ezra Klein's abundance book. The reason, they want to build the trains, they should have broken the law. That's what we did out there. We're lucky we're in the ocean because no one's really looking. It's hard to see. But like, Department of Agriculture, going on my Twitter feed to see if I'm illegally selling scallops. Looking at, the 60 minutes footage of the drone to count the lines I have to see if they can bust me, right? And so that experience of that negative experience, the government and like the scientific community and the government community is soaking up so many resources. Like every grant that comes in, a huge amount would go into like, 60% into the university overhead. Like, and there would just be like very little that goes out into answering and working on the real problems and making sure the whole ecosystem benefits, right? So that was a fascinating experience. And I came to the conclusion, and then I'll stop, which is that the folks that are governing, the political, like this set of stuff, the folks who ran this hype curve are not equipped to solve the problems of the future. I think they are I think they're in climate denial, that they can use semi-justice business models from the 20th century and update them to a time of extreme volatility on a whole bunch of fronts. I think this idea that competition is going to be the way to get ahead, the only way forward. This isn't like a philosophical or ethical thing. Collaboration is going to be the only way to innovate our way out of this. And they're fundamentally about building walls, so all making the same mistakes again and again and again. And I look at the cultural situation, the social situation, I look at the economic situation, and like, I'm like, these folks have a track record. They've been running things for 30, 40 years. Globalization, social media, AI. And I didn't realize this until I lived through it. And I'm like, they're brilliant, they're smart. I thought they didn't care about us. It's not that, some don't. It's not that. They're just not equipped. So my view now in this green wave is like, no one's coming to help us. Let's do it ourselves. And that was the reshaping of green wave and now it's like, and you know, pirate politics, like the pirates left the Navy, set up like Libertania and other places around the world where captains were voted on and off the ships. First direct democracy. Wages were equally shared with women, former black slaves. They had health insurance. If you got hurt, I mean, workman's comp, if you got hurt on the job, like they went and they just made up new rules. And so I do feel like it's time to head out to sea.
Yeah.
And just like try to figure out how to do it ourselves with local region and then connect all those do it ourselves efforts around the country and the globe. So I don't know if this is making sense. Like this is just like, I told you, it's like bubbling up now.
Yeah. And how, but it does, it makes sense to me, and it also ties in with a lot of the movement for regenerative agriculture, regenerative organic as opposed to organic with monocultural farms, carrot farms in Mexico. The need to have in food a healthy small scale capability for producing both on land and in the ocean. And this cooperative, it's interesting when you said that the figuring out what to sell, what to make from seaweed.
Yeah.
I think when Patagonia started Provisions, we have a small food company. And when we started that, we were going through the same process. And you see that in the production of all these small companies. Oh, well, chocolate's big. Well, everybody's got to make chocolate. Everybody's got to get in. And what we discovered when we talked to whom you mentioned in the book, our wonderful friend from Salina, Kansas, has been working for 30 years to bring the Great Plains back to health. When he told us about this perennial wheatgrass that could actually grow roots that won't go 9 to 10 feet deep into the ground, mix up the microbes and the fungi and soil much faster than nature can, that taught us when we actually contracted with a brewery in Portland, Oregon to use Kernza as an ingredient because he'd never been able to get any farmer to plant it. And he couldn't get a farmer to plant it because they couldn't sell it. So this was a cooperative effort. We got the brewery in Portland to contract, and then we contracted with farmers to grow the first 100 hectares of Kernza. So the point of this is that after we were able to produce this beer that made possible some regenerative agriculture in Minnesota, we understood that any new product coming out of Provisions would have to solve a problem in the food system or in agriculture, and that was the way to go. And this is a model, and this is something that business can do that government can't do, because business doesn't have to go to government to raise taxes. It doesn't have to go to rich people to provide financial assistance. It can create a financially sustainable system that can support efforts like these, which will actually be the future, I think, or would be a good future for us.
You know, we tried to model on, like, we just tried to steal that model. I like stealing. It's like distance collaboration.
It's cooperative.
Yeah, I know. I feel a little more like vigilante if I'm stealing. But so exactly that, in that, like there are certain things that the ocean can grow and can grow well in the unit economics work. And then there are certain problems that need to be solved, especially in the ingredient space for us, like, you know, the sort of soy, sodium alternatives, the rising prices of like soy and other stuff, and like thickeners, all these different problems that some of the big companies are having. They're really worried about their ingredient supply chains, and they can get this domestic source. But the trouble is, if it's just like, they just don't fit. So we created something called the collab. and we're just launching it, which brings together the full supply chain. And the company, large scale companies, we can't talk about who it is yet, but are setting out the problems they need to solve, knowing that these are the crops that we can grow in a regenerative way. And that's like the bound of the project. And then the processors are in the middle and CPG companies are in the middle. And that's just exactly the current set.
There was, going back a little bit to the problem, there was a wonderful line that I was in the book. A couple of great phrases like memoir, but one of them was what you were talking about being courted by impact investors, and whom you described as sharks that were both fuzzy and bloodthirsty. And I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit. That's an interesting combination of fuzzy and bloodthirsty.
Yeah. Remember that? It was a very alienated time. I remember I went to one of their houses and I couldn't figure out how to use the toilet. It's one of these toilets. That was a fuzzy toilet, right? It did really good things for the earth, right? You know what I mean? It was like everything and save water and stuff. But I'd ask a friend to come in and flush it, which was also very embarrassing. I think I've had I've been very lucky to surf in a lot of these spaces and listen and learn and be a witness in a very concrete thing, right? Like in just one industry, trying to solve certain problems. So the investor folks really had the right language. Well, I think they like brought in the right dialect, but we were speaking different languages. It took me a long time to figure that out, right? In the regenerative, the sustainable, the co-ops, like all of these things, climate change all over the place. And so I thought they were, and they really meant it, right? Just like I really meant it. Like they aren't bad folks. It's just they are positive that you need to make a massive profit for something to be successful. Now, I believe in profits. I would say I believe more in like livelihoods than profits, right? Like including of like the staff and the CEOs, right? Like I don't know where that bar is for people, but I think of it in terms of livelihoods instead of profits. But that's why I see it as like ideological. I don't think they've even thought through, can they make those same returns? Is the unicorn strategy going to work in the era of climate change? Like everywhere I look, I see climate denial. Not like head in the sand Congress climate denial. I see conservationist environmental climate denial. I see small is beautiful food folks climate denial. You know what I mean? I have it all over my, like me too. I identify mine. So it's that bloodthirsty where it's funny, they often swear when they get to the profit. I was just reading a piece where they're like, save the planet and make a fucking profit. Like there's this like big, right? Especially in Silicon Valley, right? There's this cultural piece. And I think that's ideological, maybe even worse, just like a cultural thing that's come and no one's really dug into it and asked it. And it's I don't have any of the answers. I was struck, having spent time with them, how unrigorous they were, how impressed they were with pitch decks, and like I can sell anything to any disgusting food to anybody. That's just like something I learned to do, right? And that's an American, very American skill, and they're just like wowed by it. And then it. And we went through all the spreadsheets and all this sort of stuff, but like, if the impulse from above was like, let's do this, the numbers were just completely fictional because they're unicorn numbers, right? The total fiction. I want creative nonfiction, not fiction, is my sweet spot.
And one more question I want to ask you, and then move on to take questions from folks here. Do we have the capacity? People online as well. You've spent a lot of time building up this program of trying to enable working class people who want to come in and be ocean farmers, how to train them, how to what kind of financing they will need, which is fairly minimal. How is that going?
Yeah.
And has in the afterwash of going through, making this decision not to attract those kinds of investors, are you able to continue to do the work? And what did you, this is actually the crux of the question. What have you learned since the book about what those folks need to make a successful business?
Yeah. It's a great question. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right? I think, and we're going on this journey of experimenting and feeling we know that sort of modest program, stay in our lane of training, is not enough. We took care of supply. There was like so much, like we could flip a switch right now. And when I say we, it's not Greenway, it's just like all of us, right? All of us farmers, hatchery people, and like, you know, there's no such thing as like a Greenway farm or franchise or like people run their own way. It's their own thing. We are here when we are invited in and ask for support. That's when, you know, we're here. I just want to be sort of clear about that. But we've had that moment of no one's coming to save us. We got to do self-rescue. It's forced us to like really lean into the nonprofit, co-op, and community organization space and be like, can we bend the physics of the market with those? Not with B Corps, not with like, can we do those? And because they're not extractive, because they don't have investment money that needs return, they don't have large CEO salaries, they're just like, that's what I mean, they just work on different principles. And we, not more like morally sure, but actually it might be a great way to run a business. And the reason I say that's relevant to the farmers is like, we got to set up a supply chain where there's enough margin for them to get paid well.
Yeah.
Right. So that there's more kelp. So if you're a climate activist, we just need to incentivize more kelp in the water. Therefore, the farmers who do the work need to be paid. Right. You can see I'm kind of extracting the moral out of all this. I just don't think it's that's a bit of shift in my head. I have my, you know, morals at home, but I don't think it's needed. But so we've had to create this whole thing and lean in really, really, really hard in the nonprofit. So for example, just to, you know what we were. Now we're fabricating and manufacturing hatcheries and shipping containers and shipping them out, where we go and build and physically and train there. And why? Because every hatchery needs to be exactly the same. So we're all working on the same Chevy engine and can learn together. All the hatcheries were different. I didn't think we'd be
What are
fair.
you hatching?
So just a little seed, kelp seed. We have seed banks, farmer-owned seed banks, which, by the way, we did to keep the seed out of the hands of the scientists who were starting companies to privatize seed around the world, right? Like in kelp, folks who had been to my wedding, it's one of those bizarre. But anyway, so we're building hatcheries, and we're out there buying and building processing machinery for stabilization. So that's one. We have a data center where everybody has the MyKelp app on farms all over the country, and they're entering data, taking pictures, and we're able to do farmer-led science there, where we have all the data, and then we bring all the farmers together to look at that data, to learn from it, and figure out what the next set of questions are, which is an old tradition in co-ops, by the way. That's sort of like farmer-driven co-op science, right? So, and then we bring in scientists to answer some of those questions. They have a vital role. I'm not like, but it needs to be led because the farmers are asking the 5-year questions, not the 20-year questions, and it's not grant-driven like the sort of university-driven in the same way. We have alternative subsidies like crop insurance out of the nonprofit where we're paying farmers every year. It's 63 farms, about $1.4 million we've put out subsidy so that they can weather the bumpiness in the market and the bumpiness, the storms that come in, gear failure. Like we need those farmers around. And then, but then there are also on top of that performance bonuses where they get money if production goes up and quality goes up. Separate, right? You still get that insurance, but then also there's sort of incentive pieces. We have the collab, which is bringing the entire supply chain together for product development.
Mhm.
right? And then we created a for-profit, which is just down the street. I'm excited to have you come, which is a biostimulant company. And there is like, why are we doing a green wave? Because we think the nonprofit can create alternative economic structures that companies cannot.
Mhm.
This is where there's a bit of
That's interesting.
like not disagreement, but like
Yeah.
that's where we're leaning in, that actually just like a hospital,
Mhm.
a church,
Mhm.
museum, a community bank,
Right.
the unit economics are just totally different because it's not extractive in the same way. There's just, that's like the whole idea. So I just think and the biostimulant plant, what it is, and this goes back to Colette too, one of the mistakes we made, dumbest thing I ever did was kelp is the new kale. But I blame Yale a little bit. The reason is a bunch of the Yale adults came out on the farm and they wore the kale shirts.
Mhm.
And it's joke, we crossed it out and wrote kelp.
Yeah.
And in the book, I've got a kelp is the new kale. If any kelp I grow is ever sold on a high-end restaurant, I failed. If I care about the things that I'm saying I care about, right? That's not like, God bless the chefs and like all that. Yeah, don't criticize. It's just like there's a different journey here. Like kelp is not kale. It's fully different. It's going to take a different trajectory.
Mm.
It's more problematic and harder, but probably more opportunity. But what I was going to say is this thinking of the crop as a problem solver. We used to think kelp as like a hero ingredient. You hear this in the blue carbon, zero inputs, all this sort of stuff. Put people to work, right? No, it needs to be a problem solver.
Mhm.
It needs to solve problems in existing industry. And that's rather than kelp being like biofuel and everything, the power of kelp, there's all this stuff in it that actually can help solve problems.
Right.
And so biostimulant is one. If you take kelp biostimulant, we've got a fermentation factory. We partnered with a Maori, New Zealand company that came and transferred the technology, and our factory's right here in New Haven. You get to detox your soil. You get 30% reduction in fertilizer inputs. And of course, fertilizer prices doubled for land-based farmers in 2024, I think. And you get drought and heat protection. So wineries call it the seaweed biostimulant, the sunscreen we always need. About 5% of the globe uses seaweed biostimulants, get that to 10%, and like completely remake the map and give regenerative farmers and conventional farmers a new tool for climate resiliency. Help as problem solver. And in fact, anywhere where there's been a nutrient crisis on land, people have gone to the sea to refill their soil, right? With fish and seaweed forever. And it's like so simple in that like all the nutrients that are in the ocean, that are killing the ocean, come from you folks who walk on soil.
Yeah.
Right? It comes from land-based ag. I was at not Al Gore. Does he have a farm? Yeah, I was at his Nashville farm thing. And there's 300 people. I was the only ocean person there. And they're all like, we're running out of nutrients. And everybody's using too much fertilizer. And I was like, shit, I got all your nutrients. I'll sell them back to you. It's just that simple idea. Yeah.
I think that's a good place to segue into questions from folks.
Hello, my name is Dylan. Thank you so much for coming today. I also love the whaler's hat. This is not a fully fleshed out question, but I thought it was really interesting how you started your talk by sort of talking about the cultural memory and the cultural legacy, not only around things like fishing, but also things like oil, like coal, like mining. Those things are really important and have political power. They also build resilience and some like longevity into an industry. I think for things like maybe even seaweed farming, writing a book is a really tangible example of trying to build that same kind of cultural legacy. And do you think there's other ways that you can continue to build that kind of sustainability, longevity, and resilience into your industry here, sort of in the Long Island Sound? I was just sort of wondering, like giving a talk like this is a really clear example of that, but are there other really tangible ways that you see as an imperative way to build sort of sustainability and resilience in your industry, so seaweed farming, oyster farming can, grow into the future? Thank you.
It's a great question because that is like the way we're going to transition and tap into blue collar innovation is by keeping the cultural meaning alive within the climate solution space, right? Like, so and in fact, I'm glad you bring that up because I feel like I'm at risk of losing that, right? Losing the beginning because of all this other stuff, right? And so I really appreciate. I think the farming is a very lonely profession, and it's really important to tap into that. So gatherings are actually a really and not having like panels and stuff like that, but just gatherings really do matter. That's one. The other thing is long traditionally, there's incredible poetry festival out in the Pacific Northwest every year, a fisherman's poetry poetry gathering, which is just gorgeous, right? And so and we've thought of I wish we could figure out, a kelp sea shanty song like there is. And this is also a way for we have a large community of passion in our world, there are farmers, we have funnel, but there's a lot of people that are just psyched and I love them, right? And so it's a way to bring in their creativity. I think I was just with some folks in something called the Mutualist Society, and they were just learning from them about third spaces. And that's really, when I heard you talking, it made me think of third spaces, the coffee shops, the libraries, so how in our economic development just transition plan do we make sure there are third spaces in there? And God, we got to do that. Yeah, thanks for that. You give me another job to do. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks so much. We talked about kind of the nonprofit structure being very different from this unicorn ideology. Do you currently have enough kind of supply and capacity within Greenwave to meet the demand you're seeing? And is that a limitation by not being able to go out and get extra funding in order to not be beholden to that funding?
Yeah. No, the supply problem is solved. We have a thing right now where, the challenge with everything I started early was just oh, we can just replicate. It looks different everywhere, right? I should have thought of that and I didn't, right? It's just a dumb thing. But a ton of places around the country, around Canada and other places, the pieces are all there. They need to be optimized and mobilized in unison, right? So we have a thing with the next 3 years, we're going through optimization and mobilization of each region with cohorts to fix those particular place-based problems. Maybe the hatchery is getting too much contamination. Maybe the farm design, all these, there's maybe not stabilization there, or there needs to be changing of permits to a different date that fits the kelp, those sort of things. But we could flip a switch and get to 20 to 30 million pounds. There's enough leases, enough gear, enough farmers. Supply is not the issue. It is the market where where the unit economics do not work. It's not that there isn't something to do with the kelp, the cosmetic. So many people already use kelp, and the deforestation is a huge issue of the kelp forest and policy. There's big policy pushback around the globe, and the wild harvests are dying off, right? So supply is dropping, and Asian labor force is huge problem. So their supplies and everybody's looking for domestic sources of their raw materials, right? So that's all in line. It's just that when they make the bioplastics, when they make the gels for sunscreen, when they do the frosting for the Pop-Tarts, all kelpy stuff, right? The numbers don't work for us. That's why. Maybe they will. Listen, we do a lot of support of the companies that are sort of venture capital funded. We do it we're very, very engaged, connecting them with farmers, helping them with getting the quality that they need, all this sort of stuff. It's just Greenwave's role as a nonprofit is to think long term and ask this question: what if a different business model is needed over the next 50 years, let alone 100 years? And so we're fully in the current system moving forward, working with all the current players, and I hope that works. Then we don't have to do this other stuff. But our job is local, regional, from below solutions while everything goes tribal and falls apart. We gotta start that now. And so I'm starting to make new friends and allies outside of the seaweed sector. And folks who are thinking about this like development from below, not like coffee shop hyper local, but actually how do you do industrial development? How do you ask yourself, like, what do you love in your community? What are you good at? Who do you want to be? What do you miss? These are Zita Cobb questions. She's amazing. I don't know if you know Zita, a short fast. Brilliant. She's out of Newfoundland just by chance, a little bias there. But she's like, how do you like do a landscape analysis of your community? And then let's start connecting and let's start trading amongst ourselves. So there are folks like, you know, the Industrial Commons is doing incredible work, and there are just so many of them. So I'm out, literally the last 6 months, I've been out calling up, trying to make new friends for this reason. Yeah.
Just a quick comment. I mean, I think that this is absolutely critical because what we're seeing with a slowdown and some critical failures in globalization is that has also edged out a lot of local economic activity that needs to return. And it needs to return especially to diminish the effects of ecological collapse because people care about where they are, where they live.
Hi, my name's Ashley. Thank you so much for being here. This was really interesting. For context, I am a 4th generation lobster fisher from Maine. So I don't actually fish because I get seasick, but that's the legacy there. So one of the big questions I have around climate adaptation in fisheries is how to navigate the like sociocultural elements of that. You probably know this, but like fishers in the type of fisher that they have no interest in a lot of cases in necessarily diversifying. Like if you told my grandpa that he should become an oyster farmer, he would probably laugh in your face, right? So I'm just curious what your experience has been with like incentivizing that behavioral change and that proactive adaptation when we're not yet in a context where it's completely necessary. Like the fishery hasn't collapsed yet for lobstering in Maine. We can see examples of that in southern New England, and we can look at trends and projections that don't look great. But I think like so much of your personal, social, familial identity is tied up in this occupational identity. And I think that's one of those huge barriers to adaptation that I've seen. So just curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
It's a great question, and 4th generation, that means something. That really means something. You know, my own personal thing, like I'm still embarrassed of growing kelp. Like I didn't want to kelp. I don't want to grow kelp. Like not me, right? Like just like I God bless kelp farmers. I don't have fun with them, right? You know, it's like they're just different, cut from different cloth. I actually had a land-based farmer after a conference call email me after and said, I hope now that you're growing vegetables, you become more appropriate on these calls. So you can imagine what I responded. I would say, but so like I was forced there. I was forced into oysters. And then I thought about being a lobsterman, but like if you're at that time, the lobsters were starting to drop, people were moving at conch, stuff like that. And I was getting laughed off the docks, flat out. There were lobster boats out there, right? Then this is 20 years ago in the Sound. It was an $18 million business, I think, in the Sound. And then the fish started to disappear. Like, so Long Island Sound is a story that is, I thought then was going to be a slow thing. Like, you know, again, that lobster boat, like then it'll eventually in 30 years, maybe in Maine. And it took like, you know, water temps got up to 70 degrees and up in, was it Bristol Bay? I forget where, like, you know, Alaska, the crab, like the stuff, you know, it's insane. So it is here and now. That's what I'll say. And there is a generational thing where like, if you're a certain age, there's just like, you know, you're riding a certain way. I don't know how to say it, but like there is a generational split. Our job is, so I saw in Newfoundland, and this is the cultural piece. If like you do not prepare for a transition, as a people, as a community, like, and you wait for elites to do it, what they're gonna do is the scientists and the government and the environmentalists are gonna come in down and shut down your fishery in like a week before you know, right? Then be like, the studies are in, and then you're gonna, the whole politics of the province. My province went from, we had a socialist premier, moved to very, very conservative. It's balanced out now, but like that you just see that massive, massive shift. So in times of transition, two things. One, process really matters. I think they're doing that very well in Kentucky and trying to figure out the process transition. And then having a solution foundation ready, not like as an idea, fully matured and deployed. Because the other thing you want to do, like they might poo-poo kelp, but what they're very right about is that, oh, this won't work, because they're brilliant business people. I mean, a friend of mine's a shrimper. He negotiates with the Chinese on the docks every day at a Rhode Island, right? These are like, you know, as sophisticated as you can get. And so they know what's, you know, just sort of like hot air and not, so it has to be very real. So what I'd say, and Maine is like, actually, you know, one of this, probably the top center of seaweed farming now in the country, is that when people are saying no, but the fish are heading north, or like lobsters are not being found at a young, before age 7, stuff like that. That's when everybody needs to lead in and begin doing it, just to save our communities and the culture of our communities.
I'd like to just back that up, because I live about 6 months of the year near Stonington, Maine. And the lobster industry, this heart of the lobster industry, has moved from Kennebunk up to Stonington, and they're already looking, the waters are getting too warm. And there is a lot of work in the community to try and prepare what will be the next shape. Because lobstering is like coal mining. It pays well. And so what's going to replace it is probably not going to pay as well as lobstering. How do you keep the community alive when you do that? And I think that, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
I was going to ask a question. This has been so great. Thank you. Bren, you said sort of this issue that the numbers don't match, and this issue that you need a market for people to sell into. I'm wondering if you could just talk in more detail about what's not matching in the numbers and how you're thinking of solving that problem.
Yeah, right. The specialty food numbers don't work out. Shipping jars of fermented things to Whole Foods, it just doesn't work, right? Or no, let me correct that. It works up to like 2 million pounds throughout the country. So like, yeah, it's like we have to think of a whole leaf strategy where there is a specialty food thing, but we have to scale. Like if we're actually going to seriously employ people in any scale, this can't be just based on specialty food. So like that can't scale. It's helped build the industry, and that's where I came out of course, was the specialty food. We wipe off the table now anything that's speculative, where you're competing truly with a fossil fuel industry. So biofuel, blue carbon, the policy isn't there, the science isn't there, and the price is too low to incentivize. And so we just start crossing stuff off the list and look at the ones that are close. The unit economics are much closer. And all I care about is what farmers are getting paid. But everyone needs to succeed for farmers to get paid. So we do like a lot of open book negotiation. What are you making? What are you making? Like food logistics is the worst business in the world. As far as losing, you just lose so much money on that. But if everybody's looking, so that we know this, like I think I came in with too much of a justice frame. Like farmers, high. And it was like, no, everybody's got to, it's a supply chain. Everybody's got to succeed. We're going to choose who our friends are in that supply chain. But so we find things that are close, and then where do we find those choke points, subsidize it for a while, and figure out in that ecosystem of let's say biostimulant, or let's say sodium alternative, whatever, what parts of that supply chain have to remain nonprofit for a while the other parts can make money. We subsidize this, but knowing we need to innovate, we will innovate on this part, so it becomes profitable, as opposed to like this whole thing. So we're just breaking things up like that. And the other piece of it, which is really key, is standardizing equipment. Like it sounds so silly, but like it's absolute linchpin that we're all working with the same shredder, same grinder, same hatchery, same stuff, because otherwise that's a way to lose money and not to innovate if we're all looking at different machines.
Well, thank you, everyone.